You are tuned in to the MEDIMAGZA podcast. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of MEDIMAGZA, the podcast. I'm your host, Clive Maestri. Today, we have a very special guest on the show and one of MEDIMAGZA's family writers, Carla Gerryts. She's a dietitian in a private practice based in Pretoria, Gauteng now. With experience in psychiatric settings, she has a passion for helping people understand their own food story. Through a gentle but informed and concise approach, she aims to unlock people's natural ability to nourish themselves optimally. Welcome to the show, and so lovely to have you with us.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Clive. Thank you for your time.
Now, Carla, can you share a bit of your journey? What inspired you to become a dietitian, and how did you develop your interest in the link between nutrition and mental health?
Thank you for that question. I grew up in a household where food was always very important, and sort of the kitchen was the center of and truly the heart of the home. And it was round about grade 10, so when I was 16 or 17, that I was diagnosed with a medical condition that actually required the assistance of a dietitian to intervene. And that was where I was first exposed to the profession. And from my first appointment, I was hooked in terms of helping others achieve the same results and goals. And from there on, I decided to study dietetics. It led me to study dietetics at the Northwest University and then did my community service at the Trans Psychiatric Hospital.
That's amazing. I love how these stories, of childhood or prior to even getting into the degrees. It's almost as if medicine chooses you as opposed to you choosing medicine. It's actually a lovely story. Your article for MediMag in the current issue, highlights how mental health struggles can make nutrition challenging. Now, in your experience, what are some practical first steps for someone who's feeling overwhelmed and doesn't know where to start with healthy eating?
I think it's very important to refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in this case. So, when we are at the top of the hierarchy, we are busy with self actualization. We are planning, and we need to understand that meal prep and thinking about grocery list and everything that comes around a healthy lifestyle is actually very top level. So, with someone struggling with major depressive disorder, anxiety, just getting out of bed is sort of the main task for the day. So I think taking it hour by hour and breaking the day down into segments have proven to be really helpful. For example, to say, this week we are only going to look at lunches. That's the biggest problem area at this time in your life. Let's refine lunch. The rest can stay as it is for a moment. And before you know it, in a month's time, with weekly follow up, you've actually incorporated so many helpful principles. I think what's also useful is to identify what works because I have yet to speak to someone who doesn't already apply some principles that can be the building blocks for a greater process. So I think just focusing on what's working well gives some encouragement and momentum to the process as well.
That is brilliant advice because I think with, the year that goes by so fast, a lot of people fall short on their New Year's resolutions. And I think one thing leads to the other. And then before you know it, it's almost year end and you're dealing with so much stress and fatigue that a diet is the last thing you want to focus on right now. So that's wonderful advice. Thank you for that. Something that I was quite interested in is the Smiles trial that you referenced. I find it so compelling. Why do you think the Mediterranean diet in particular shows such promise for supporting mental health?
I would sort of identify the two key components as fiber and omega-3 fatty acids. So fiber, I think, is one of the more underutilized tools in our diet in terms of our overall well-being. And I've also in the article, I'm referring to the gut-brain connection. And fiber is such an integral part of feeding the gut microbiomes. I think that's something that's very prevalent in the Mediterranean diet, from fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as the use of legumes and whole grains, for example. I have a colleague who say that we are not admitting people with protein deficiencies into hospital, we are admitting people with colon cancer. So, yes, of course, there's a lot of buzz around things like adequate protein and protein supplementation, but fiber is one of those things that really can take a little bit more of a focus for us. The other thing, of course, then omega-3 fatty acids, which you can find in your fatty fish, your avocados, olives, nuts, nut butters. The reality is in our South African diet, according to what I've read, about 15 to 20% of people, and that's a more overestimated estimate, uh, actually achieve the omega-3 intake that they should.
Mm,
So the reality is that those sources can be expensive. If I were to tell someone, I'm recording this from Pretoria, Gauteng, if I were to refer someone to buy a fatty fish now, where is it accessible? Who can afford it actually? So I think that is some very real barriers in the South African context on how to get our omega-3 levels actually adequately addressed. So that, for me, that's two key components in the Mediterranean diet that stands out
mm.
in terms of well-being.
Yeah. No, 100%. I completely agree with you. I think these vitamins are so important to have and to sustain, for better wellness. In a South African context, like we mentioned, how do you think we can get most of this in a typical, South African diet per se?
Yeah, I think one thing to focus on, rather flip the lens and say, what are we taking too much of? So, if we speak about saturated fat, if we speak about trans fatty acids, food that's heated in oil for a long period of time, like your pies, chips, donuts, samosas, speed cooks, let's focus on identifying those, because I've never looked someone in the eye and said, you know what, your problem is you're eating too much baby marrow.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that we can actually add, but the first point of reference is just cleaning up the diet a little bit, and that is another flip side of just keep what is working still when you remove those components.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. You mentioned earlier about the gut-brain connection, which I wanted to ask you a bit more on. For someone new to the concept, how would you explain its importance and what simple dietary changes can support gut health?
Perfect. So what we know about the gut is it's actually much more complex than what we ever thought to understand. Also, I think we are only like knowing the tip of the iceberg of how the gut actually interacts with all of our body systems. But what we know is that the gut consists of a large variety of microbiomes, different types of bacteria that all does different types of functions. These bacteria, one of their functions actually is to send signals to the brain. So there's a communication channel called the central nervous system that links the gut microbiome to the brain and actually helps to regulate things like serotonin levels. There's the statement that about 80% of our serotonin, which is one of our mood stabilizers, actually is manufactured in the gut. So the reality is that not only is mood one of the biggest benefits of that component, also gut motility, in other words, just how the gut functions overall. So when it comes to supporting good gut health, I already touched on fiber and its importance. Then also thinking about fermented foods. So it's something that I did not necessarily grow up eating, but things like kombucha, sauerkraut, kefirs really can be really useful tools in supporting our gut microbiome and reducing inflammation in the body. Inflammation is another concept when it comes to diet and mood that a lot of articles that I've read actually describes depression as an inflammatory disease of the brain.
Mm,
So we are very interested in reducing inflammation, and these fermented foods aid with that as well. And then in terms of protein, now the good thing about protein and fat is it reduces gut mortality. It's good in the sense of weight loss because it helps to keep fuller from mealtime to mealtime. On the flip side, excessive amounts can also be harmful to the gut microbiome. So what's
mm,
very interesting is that the type of bacteria that grows is a type of bacteria that you feed it. So if you think about cravings, it's not only an issue of willpower. Just an example, if you're having takeaway burgers 3 times a day, that the type of bacteria that loves takeaway burgers is what's going to flourish. So now it's overruling the positive bacteria that serves your immune function, etc., and they actually get suppressed.
Mm.
That's why if you start with a new lifestyle, people often say it was difficult at the beginning, but then it got easier. And I'm wondering how that support actually sort of the gut switch in the gut microbiome actually support that experience.
No, that's brilliant advice, and it's so easy for someone to, fall short of their dietary needs, but they don't understand where they're going wrong. So I think that the gut-brain connection, I think it's so, so important. Moving on now, and I'm so guilty of this as well, comfort foods during stressful times. Which are often ultra processed. What advice do you have for breaking the cycle and making more nourishing choices, especially when motivation is at an all-time low?
So, one of the big questions we need to ask ourselves more in healthcare is why. So, if you find yourself at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon reaching for a sugar rich option or maybe a salty type of snack, the question would be why is it happening during that time of the day? Your sleeping pattern. Is it actually just a ask of the body for more energy, quick, easy, accessible energy that actually stabilizes your blood sugar and momentum in that moment? So, in terms of habits, then you will find yourself, we are creatures of habits. Our days tend to get pretty much structured the same way. Maybe after a difficult Monday morning meeting, you're always celebrating with a bit of a cappuccino and a treat. So it gets sort of like incorporating the routine and the need. So the question is, what do I want? What do I need? And the need is for relief and to celebrate something that weighed heavily on your mind. So the question then is also to say, listen, how can I get that feeling that's not food related? Because the need is for connection, for celebration. Food can be part of it, but can it be something else that also addresses that? And then, of course, in terms of comfort foods, your typical meals, just naming some like curries, burgers, pizzas. Of course, you can modify them in a more nutrition balanced way by substituting some ingredients. So sometimes the preparation method that needs to
Mm.
be adapted a little bit so you can experience the same meals that you are used to and love, but in a more nutritionally balanced manner.
Yeah, no, definitely. One of my favorites that I love to have is a cottage pie. And I've kind of switched it up whereby I use sweet potatoes as opposed to normal potatoes, and it's made such a difference. It's incredible. Now you mentioned that pro-inflammatory diets can worsen mental health symptoms. What are some common red flag foods to watch out for, and what are your go-to anti-inflammatory foods?
Yeah, perfect. So in terms of red flags, I've already quickly touched on that, which is mostly our trans fatty acids. Now, just a reminder on what trans fatty acids is. If I take a bulk of oil and I reheat it as the oils turn black, and the exposure to food over a long period of time, as in hours maybe, in that oil, that's what's going to create your trans fatty acid change and your pro-inflammatory response to that food. Just to recap again, typically would be your samosas and your pies and your chips and donuts, churros, things like that. Also, in excessive amount of saturated fat, so that conversation is slightly being rediscussed in terms of how inflammatory is animal fat actually. I
Mhm.
still believe that our level of physical activity has not quite yet adapted for a high degree of saturated fat consumption. So I think that's still a big barrier. But in terms of favorite anti-inflammatory foods, so if I break it down into sort of different types of fruits, definitely berries, all types of berries, blueberries, lovely to incorporate in lots of ways. Actually, pineapple as well, and then vegetables, spinach, a go-to. Also, your broccoli and cauliflower, your cruciferous vegetables, really, really essential in feeding good gut microbiome. Healthy fats in terms of Brazil nuts. Two Brazil nuts gives you all of the selenium you need in a day for the brain to also function properly. So love that, as well as avocados and olives. So those are just a few of my favorite anti-inflammatory components. Fluid-wise, let's not forget about green tea. I know it's not everyone's favorite, but you can make a very nice ice cold green tea. So you can let it get cool with a bit of lemon juice, crushed ice, So you can actually adapt. You don't need to drink it hot if that's not your thing.
Wow. I'm actually going to try that recipe because I am a fan of green tea. And sometimes you like, oh, it's a bit boring. I'm definitely going to try the cold right now that you mentioned it. Thank you for that.
And you
Carla,
can add some mint leaves for good measure.
nice, nice one. Your private practice. Now let's talk a bit about that. Have you had any memorable success stories where your nutrition changed and made a noticeable difference in someone's mental wellness?
I think for me, a patient that I really enjoyed working with was a student of 21 years of age who came to me with a very difficult relationship with food and a very tough family dynamic. She was very scared to make the first phone call and to ask, are you going to force me to eat more? And what is the consultation going to be like? And I understood from the get go that this is going to be a long term relationship and that we need to start somewhere and that I will not be the only member of the multidisciplinary team involved. So
Mm,
we get our sort of conversation started and we built a report to such a degree that she was open to more therapeutic input to where she is. One can speak about recovery in disordered eating. There's different measures for recovery, and there's even some controversy in using the word recovered. But I think from everything that she is reporting and what I'm experiencing in a much better position when it comes to food and how she views food and the nutritional status, etc. And what I enjoy is a spark of creativity. So she will send me emails with a favorite recipe that she has tried or a picture of a meal that she has prepared. And that type of feedback gets me excited. You can see it's moved from fear to really enjoyment. And that is something that really fuels my passion for what I
yeah.
do.
No, I can imagine that must be such a rewarding thing when, something that you've studied for and you're so passionate about is literally helping somebody. I think that's absolutely applaudable. So congrats on that one. For the busy professional or students that we just spoke of, who feel they don't have time for meal prep, what are your top three practical nutritional hacks?
Perfect. So I think when it comes to meal prep, we must move away from the idea that it's already a fully prepared frozen meal. Let's think compartments. So especially if you get bored with the same thing over and over again, instead of thinking, okay, I need to make this mince and rice and broccoli and just have that every evening, prepare different components separately. Prepare your mince, cut up your tomatoes, cut up your cucumber, you can put it in a wrap, you can put it in a pasta, you can make it into meatballs with other vegetables. So think components rather than fully prepared dishes. The other thing that can be helpful is, especially if breakfast. So what I found for my patients is breakfast is really a tricky time, and it's sort of always been this messaging of breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And that conversation has always shifted as well. But for someone who needs some nutrition at the beginning of the day, for whichever reason, fluids can be a meal, be it a smoothie, be it a properly recommended and tested supplement, be it a
Mhm.
soup. For the type of patient I work with lack of appetite occasionally and lack of interest in food, drinking your nutrients can be extremely helpful. And then also in terms of finding um, your protein first for preparation. So what you want to do is you want to identify two proteins for the week, let's say chicken and mince, and you have that bulk prepared. And that's what you can use for versatility. So because it's easier to add add-ons, the protein is what takes the longest time. So my suggestion is to start with that and experiment with the rest around the dish.
No, I love it. I'm definitely someone who enjoys my meal prep, but I've got to admit it does get boring and monotonous. So I like the fact that you say compartmentalize. You don't need to do a full mince. You can do a meatball. You can do something completely different, but the same amounts. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for that. You talk about unlocking people's ability to nourish themselves, Carla. Can you explain what this means and how you help clients build a healthy relationship with food?
I think if we just look at infants, for example, they are what we call naturally born intuitive eaters. They cry when they are hungry, they push food away when they are satisfied. So I do believe that when we get born, we have the ability to nourish ourselves with the correct types and amount of food. However, these type of signals get distorted along the way. For example, if you're at a family table as a small child, you cannot leave this table without finishing this plate of food, even though your body is already saying, I actually had enough. Or you were given food only as treated only as a reward for good performance. So you associate immediately that emotional connection with food with good times and celebration without normalizing it as part of the daily life. So my whole purpose is to connect people with that infant version of themselves and
Yes.
to trust what their body is telling them. Do not work according to just rules, but according to what the body is signaling them. So we want to get to a place where we are not choosing to have the salt and vinegar packet of chips because of what the label says. We want to notice how we are feeling afterwards. I'm feeling more dehydrated. I'm feeling more sluggish. If I eat something different as a snack, I feel more alert, focused. So you start to make informed decisions, not because of rules, but because of how your body is actually responding to the nourishment that you eat. So it's really a joy for me to sort of unpack that with my patients.
Moving on to spring, which we all love right now, which we're currently feeling, and I think we're going to get into summer quite quick in South Africa. It's often the time for fresh starts. If you could give our readers one spring cleaning tip for their diet, what would it be?
I would say think new about vegetables. Okay, because vegetable is sort of just like a big thing we all know we should incorporate it more in our diets, but we like sort of choose the same two or three vegetables every time in our shopping list, and we aren't sure about what how actually to use it in a creative way.
Mm.
And I want to reassure you that in terms of nutrition profile, frozen veg is just as good as fresh veg in terms of nutrient density. In fact, in some cases, even better. Now, you might prefer the taste of fresh vegetables and the texture, but the reality is, for a lot of busy people, which most of us are, frozen veg can be a lifesaver to bulk up a meal in terms of getting that fiber and nutrient profile up. So, I think recap sort of get to veg that you always wanted to try. Brinjal is a great example. Not a lot of people are familiar with brinjals and use it easily, but in a sun-dried tomato pasta with some mushrooms and peppers, cutting that up for even for a vegetarian meal, you can add animal protein if you would like to. That's a very nice and easy way to start introducing something new in your diet.
No, that's fantastic. Uh, Off the topic, if someone, for example, has an issue with overeating, do you recommend weighing food and counting calories, but also in a way, sometimes I know it feels daunting for a person to do that. What would be the way for them to negate overeating, but still have enough in their fuel tank?
That's a very difficult question. I think it's very context specific to the patient's history, etc. But where I would like to start is more with the hunger scale from 1 to 10. So if you imagine, as I'm sitting here with you talking, we all have a certain degree of hunger, one being absolutely fully satisfied, 100% not thinking about food, being present here, and 10, I can eat this table with a knife and fork if you give me a chance. Now, we all would like to consume food at a 6 or 7 out of 10. That gives us the opportunity for the body to say, listen, I do need fuel, but also for the brain to say, let's think about incorporating some things that can be helpful in this meal. If you wait until 10 out of 10, then it's too late for the brain to not be in its animal instinct to just get something very quickly to feel better.
Yeah.
So I think being more in tune and asking yourself where you are and addressing that appropriately, I think can be a good start. Also, if you're feeling like a second helping or a extra snack or something that's sort of out of your range of usual eating pattern or needs, a good theory is to say, okay, let me give myself 20 minutes. If I'm still feeling like it in 20 minutes, I can definitely have it. But to give yourself space between decision and action, that is the key. Because we have a sort of a feeling, an impulse we would like to address, and we can give ourselves room. The chocolate is going to be there. It's minding its own business in the cupboard. You can say, if I'm still feeling like it in 20 minutes' time, then we can restrict it. And often in that 20 minutes, we sort of Okay, no, I'm actually fine. I'm good to go for the rest of the day.
Yeah, no, I really believe that allowing yourself to think about it before just acting on impulse would be a very good idea. Carlo, finally, outside of your work, and we know how busy you are, what are some things you do to support your own mental well-being and keep your own nutrition on track?
So, in terms of mental well-being, I find myself in quite serious discussions and with quite a heavy emotional toll with type of patient that I enjoy with. So, for me to disconnect is completely the Real Housewives series. My favorite is Salt Lake City. Just watching something that I don't need to have too much brain power to process. It just takes my mind off everything for the moment, and I felt like that just sort of that shift between my responsibilities and what's happening in real life just give me that bit of space, and I always feel refreshed after an episode and better about my own life. in terms of in terms of nutrition, I think what keeps me on track is sort of I need to work on a day by day basis. So this morning I would look up a day and say, I can already predict that lunch might be a bit challenging. What can I pack in to accommodate for that that's suitable for today? So sort of that morning recap in my nutrition. So what is my nutrition going to be like practically today? I don't have month's menu worked out for myself, but I can identify today like this is what's possible. And for me, that works quite well.
Oh, that's amazing. That is really, really amazing. Carla, how can our readers or anyone out there get in contact with you?
You're welcome to send me an email. I work with a partner, Petri Fourie, in practice. So you're welcome to send an email to info@petrifourie.co.za. And I would enjoy discussing the content and welcome any inputs on that address.
That's awesome. We'll put up your social media links below so guys can follow you, DM you, get in contact with you. But thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we can read all about Carla's full article in the current issue of MEDIMAGZA available on our online stores. We'll link all of that in the bios for you. Carla Gerryts, thank you so much for joining us today on MEDIMAGZA Live.
Thank you so much, Clive, for the opportunity.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the MEDIMAGZA podcast.